Resource Center for Charter Schools has put together a Wisconsin Charter School model authorizer model application process. By the way, during this, Sarah, if I start blinking out, let me know, because I keep seeing internet is unstable on my side.
A couple of times this morning you got jumbled, but I think you're pretty good.
Okay. These resources have been put together via partnership with Department of Public Instruction and Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools and different consultants working in the field to create the expertise needed for the resource itself. Today, this resource is designed so that we can review a model application process that authorizers, school districts, boards, and independent authorizers can use to review applications and either approve, deny, or ask for improvement of those applications, and understand a process that you might be able to adopt or adapt to your unique situation. The duties of an authorizer, and this is by state statute, involve these 5 things, and that is all authorizers, all school districts and approved authorizers by legislative initiative should solicit and evaluate applications somehow and approve only the high quality ones that are meeting those needs of the students that have been identified or students with the needs in the district that would fit the model and mission of the school. Consider these National Association of Charter Schools principles and standards. One thing that's really important to look at, the law says consider. So as these documents were created, there's more there than potentially what would be needed, but they all have real decent outcome merit if they were looked at in an individual case and applied to districts. So this document doesn't say you have to do it that way. That's what's really important to look at. It says, here's some ideas, and here are the standards that revolve around a relationship between those NACSA, National Association of Charter School Authorizers, principles and standards, and how they've been adapted to the Wisconsin situation. And then every year, authorizers and school districts need to submit a report to the state superintendent and the legislature. That report includes a lot of items, including how many applications did they get, and how many did they approve, how many schools are they operating, how many have they closed. There's a number of things in those reports. So this presentation basically will cover a few sections, and they would be the procedures that's listed in this publication that I'll show you in just a minute. I think it's no longer a draft. I think we've moved it into a little more of an official status. It provides a template that can be adapted for soliciting, evaluating at a higher level of resolution, and approving or denying applications for charter schools in any authorizer's territory. And we'll just kind of review those processes here. Those are divided into 2 parts. The application itself as an example. Keep in mind, this isn't the application. This is not, you have to use this, but it's a great starting point to look at a 2-phase application process. And as you said earlier in some of your comments, that there was no process when you looked at approaching the district, that this would be the kind of thing that you could hand off to someone there and, say, here's some ideas of how you could adapt this so that you did have a process, and that groups that come to a school district or any other authorizer would know that there is an actual procedure, a process, a timeline, and things that they need to do, instead of adapting, trying to put ducks in oil, as they say. And then we'll also just take a look at the steps and the framework for authorizers to conduct an evaluation, timelines, rubrics that need to be taken into consideration as part of either approval or denial of a new school. So basically, it's divided into 3 sections: an introduction with a little background information, some guidelines and suggestions, including example application for phase A or part A and part B, and then a little bit at the end on the use of a rubric for evaluation of applications. So at that point, I think I will move over to a different document real quickly, because that basically is an overview of this document that I'll need to share here real quick. Too many windows open. All right, are we on it? Model authorizer.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, good. So all that stuff I just went over basically is contained right here in this document. And I think this is where any authorizer, school district or independent could take a look at this as really 3 phases of thinking about soliciting, entertaining, evaluating, perhaps giving feedback and improving applications, and then making final decisions. So the solicitation and introduction is in the first section, overview, purpose, and process. The model application process and some examples are in the second section, and there is actually model applications. And then the evaluation and determination section has some process and procedures, an example timeline. It's not one that's written in stone. And then an example evaluation rubric that a district or authorizer of other types could use to give feedback to a group to say, you know, you're ready, this is great, or here are some places where you'd like to see some improvement, or in some cases, no, I would assume. So as we look at this, that first section, and again, I don't feel the need to read it during the presentation, but if you look at it, there is a bit of background information for authorizers to use, including some of the stuff I talked about in the PowerPoint quickly, that revolves around the state statutes and the report that was mentioned. So basically, all authorizers are legislatively mandated to entertain applications if they get them, and not very many school districts actually have that active solicitation phase. They don't like say by a certain date any group in town needs to, or in our district needs to have applied for this round, let's call it, or whatever. So very few school districts do it. Most of them only get those applications when community groups approach them at this point. Okay, I just got that message again, wanted to make sure. So the purpose, again, of this document is to give those kind of resources to school districts. And I think it's very much a dual-edged purpose. Not only should authorizers use and know about this, but this is equally as important to look at from a governance board or a planning group process, so that the process of entertaining applications and getting approval from school districts or authorizers of other types is one that's all about transparency, and that there's actually a plan instead of kind of a random walk through the woods. And it also will help, I mean, this is one of the things you could do as you approach school districts to help them understand this, is this will help them adhere to the state law that they may or may not be considering at this point, because a lot of districts don't even know that that's part of what they should be doing. The first section really deals with solicitation of charter school applications. And this one basically takes the NACSA principles and repeats a few, but then also condenses them into some things that are very relevant for Wisconsin, puts them into some statements that I think authorizers or districts can use as check points. Are we doing this? Do we have this in place? Things like that, that would say, we are a district and we will entertain charter schools that will do the following things for the children in the community and our families in our district. You know, do they have a vision? Do they have a mission? Have they ever talked about it at the board level? Do they have a way of evaluating, and are they in any way, shape, or form ready for people to approach them if this happened to come up, including guidelines and timelines and things like that. And so the document goes on to ask authorizers to think about and consider having some sort of solicitation process or a document or language, which you'll see kind of in this area right here. That's my assistant in the background. You're recording this, Sarah, so that's good. I don't know. He's on a mission today, Sarah. Sorry.
Fine. It's collaborative.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's here. Oh, there was somebody here. And so the bottom line is, if we're looking at this, that's, for me, that's really annoying. I don't know about you guys. I think the male person is coming up the driveway. So giving districts some options, some ideas. What are you going to do to let people know that you can entertain applications? Things like social media, newsletter, emails, putting it on a board agenda, talking about it, having some sort of advertising if it's something that a district is actively looking for. But minimally, most districts would have to have a process in place if you approach them. It's not saying they have to advertise, but it's giving the idea that it would be a positive outcome, perhaps, if they did and they had that procedure in place. Once districts have looked at that, there's even some example language and some process and procedure here that would be able to, can you pause your recording or not? When the district is looking at this as a potential resource, this whole solicitation part may be new to a lot of districts, and there's even a little bit of language down below in the documents they could use and adapt for some of those solicitations. And then looking at this section here on page 6, more of a procedural consideration where there would be both parts of the application could be mentioned, and authorizers could put together that process by which they would be able to review the dates, benchmarks, share rubrics with groups that would want to apply for opening charter schools within their authorizing territory. And this is more of an example procedure that you could look at. They're high quality benchmarks, and they'd be things that districts could definitely adapt if they felt it was necessary to change any of them or use them even the way that they are. So putting that together ties directly into the model application itself from an authorizer. And you'll notice when you go through this process, it basically is a step-by-step. We will review your Part A and Part B application. We'll look at your proposal. We'll use a rubric. We'll put copies out there. We'll be sending the copies out to board. We'll do the board public hearing before we make our final determination. We'll send out information based on whether our decision is yay or nay, or perhaps revision. And then after the hearing, the following things will be required. So, I mean, it gives districts the ability to communicate that stuff right to groups. And using this application basically ties 100% into that process above. And the application itself is, again, there's just process information here, and I mentioned this earlier. There's a section where districts, if they're not looking to recreate everything from brand new, all of these sections are adaptable, and you'll notice that the sections in square brackets with asterisks basically say, put in your own name, your own dates and times and things like that, and adapt this language as you may want to. So
yeah, times and dates are especially important because this is sort of our best guess of what would work for a school district, but as DPI changes when their grants are due and, you know, when they'll be released from year to year, and then also just what you know about your school district and open enrollment law and things like that. Like, there's so many sort of different factors you might take into account. And so we try to embody as many of those as possible, but it could certainly change.
Yeah, and one of the things that it's mentioned in here, make sure I don't miss it because I know it, but I want to make sure when I'm looking through this, since we're not reading it verbatim, is that it's really important to consider as you move towards the application process, those dates that are administratively necessary from districts to use with the DPI. So, for example, if you get to a certain point in the process where the district is saying, yeah, we're really close, we'd like to approve you, well, by what date do you have to have applied for a school number for the DPI? And how do you get set up in the system so that your school is included in testing and all those kinds of things? So there's a bunch of dates that the DPI and school districts need to communicate on if you're firing up a new and separate school. And
independent authorizers have a different date that they need to notify DPI of their intent to authorize, which is a little bit different than the districts. And so way to, try to factor that in as well.
Okay, at this point, any questions so far? No? Okay. So a little more boilerplate language, if you want to call it that. Application process part A. These are all solicitation examples. Gives the district the opportunity, or any authorizer, the opportunity to kind of put this in play, use it as the language necessary to communicate with the public in terms of what's available and when they want certain things from the different parts of the application. Even a non-discrimination statement that puts it out there. So if they haven't included that, some information there. The actual example application is next, and that basically part A is very overview in terms of its level of detail. Just some basic demographics, names of organizations, personnel involved. This would, in your case, be pretty easy to fill out, and you already have a lot of this information on stuff I've seen on your website or on the web. And then a little bit of purpose and brief history of the organization. What are they looking at? Is it somebody that already runs a school? Is it a nonprofit? Is it a committee? Is it a group of parents? Those kinds of things. And then most districts at some point during the process will require proof of incorporation, because charter contracts cannot be written with an entity that's not an actual business. So a non-for-profit Wisconsin corporation has to be started, and a lot of folks will also advise groups to go all the way through IRS 501c3, so that the organization is both business-wise to draw on contracts with school districts, and tax-wise has the advantages of a nonprofit. Okay. Then a little organizational background, pretty straightforward boilerplate academic. Year, when are you starting, and what kind of school are you doing, those kinds of things. That's more of like, we want to throw it at you and see if you're willing to talk to us some more section of the application. Not terribly detailed, but it does allow us district to know, is this group coming to do a music and theater school, or is this a STEM school or something like that? And then let the conversation get started. The second part of the application is much more detailed. And one of the things that is really nice about this, if you want to look at it, you know, it says a perspective, so no more than 20 pages. Again, these are all recommendations, good practice. The length, the timing, the exact questions and stuff like that are all things that have been put together by folks both at the DPI and taken from the NACSA standards, and experience with putting schools together, can be modified, can be put in terms to make it work much better for individual districts. But on the other hand, one of the things that was done is that some of this, not all of it, but some of this puts the group or planning committee or governance council in the position of developing a document that can also be somewhat transferable to some of the grant stuff during these next few years. It's not 100% parallel, but a lot of the stuff that's in here is the same content information that you would need to pull together and talk about if you were going to put together some sort of those grants. So it's not recreating the wheel, which is kind of nice, and having to do it twice. So if the school district was requiring these kinds of things, they'd actually be putting the process forward another step if the grant was a potential thing in the future. And this is pretty much a much more detailed application that gets into the purposes of the school, the curricular focuses, how certain populations, special populations will be served, the age ranges, the location, a little bit on staffing, how are you going to structure the governance, financial viability and capability, the location stuff, looking for what kind of support you have in your community, even suggestions of having folks that are putting ideas together to start schools, that they have a one to even sometimes 3-year business plan in place. How are you going to operate this? Where are the funds coming from? How much will it cost? Those kinds of things. And then, you know, finally things like subcontracts and subcontractors, perhaps for custodial or transportation or whatever it happens to be. So that is the 2-part application suggestion. It's one that can certainly be adapted, but that's what this document, one of the purposes was to give districts and authorizers something to work from so that, again, you're not approaching them and they have no way to interact with the group. And then the next section and final section is the evaluation and determination section, which again, all these are set up so that it's not a required piece of language that anyone has to adapt to. These are great suggestions, and these are things that the NACSA standards recommends, that if you're going to be a high quality authorizer and deal with people in your community, that you can use these things to maintain that quality, that transparency, and build good relationships as you build new schools. So the procedures that we talked about earlier, just the basic idea of solicitation and some policies in place and timelines, and then basic applications, then would round out towards the end of the process with the ability to evaluate and give feedback. And you would be taking those two applications, Part A and Part B, as an authorizer and giving some feedback based on the public input, based on the rubrics themselves and some of the committee meetings and so on. And the following steps here, they say, provide that framework. So it's basically, you've got the written application, you've got the ability to meet and interview and implement, and then you get input from the public, and you can use a rubric to give feedback. Sarah said this earlier, and it's real important to remember that these kinds of things in this document, January 1, March 1, and so on and so forth, are really placeholders. They are entirely individual based on district needs, DPI time cycles, grant cycles, when people want to be doing this. So the order in which this was developed is more sequential, but the actual dates are obviously highly negotiable and modifiable. So if a district has a timeline, then any group like Indy would know, oh, we need to be at the board meeting for this. We need to have this here. We need to do that then. And it's not a hunt and peck or day-to-day activity. It's more of, we've got this out there. And these are the kinds of things that could even be included in the solicitation documents or the social media posts or whatever the board's doing to say, hey, we're willing to work with groups that want to do charter schools in our district, or an independent authorizer could do the same thing to let folks know this is when and where we need these. And so the timeline kind of goes through about 9 different steps, most of which are broad and relate to the earlier part of the document. So there's that relational piece all the way from the process and purpose to the application A and B model, and now the timeline, which is linked to those. And then finally, at the end, you have the model rubric. Again, I think the word model is really important as we keep looking at these things, is that these are not mandates from anywhere. These are examples of high quality behaviors that authorizers can use to communicate with people who would like to work with them to build new schools. Something as simple as evaluating the sections of those applications above, potentially using a 3-step rubric, meets, partially meets, does not meet. Some of the logic behind that was the partially definitely gives you the opportunity to discuss things. Instead of just saying yes or no, you have a gray area where you can say, well, this is kind of there, but can we get more clarity, or what can we do to improve this process or improve this application so that it meets everyone's needs on both sides, both district and other stakeholders that are starting a school. And then, obviously do some notes, questions, and concerns. This really has been split into 2 sections as a rubric. One would be the simple, on page 20 here, technical requirements. Is it there, is it not? So that gives the group feedback. Are they ready to move forward? The rubric itself, and I'm hoping I can do this on mine. I might not be able to because I'm not in Adobe. Oh yeah, I can. I have to go 3 times. There we go. On that page. The rubric itself is sideways on this document because it didn't fit in portrait. We had to put it in landscape. Basically goes right down those model application categories and gives districts the opportunity to look at a 3-level potential rubric and talk about strengths or ask concerns and additional questions, so that application processes can be a process of give and take, continuous improvement, and meeting the needs of both the district and the chartering group that wants to get things started. And that rubric goes on for a couple pages here without having to go through all of it, because it does integrate very seamlessly to the model application. So they'd be things that could be adopted or adapted pretty easily, allowing districts then to be able to get back to groups with real concrete steps. And also, I think providing a template greater than, oh, great idea, yes, bad idea, no, which a lot of times is what may have happened in the past without a process in place. So this is something that could be advocated for, so that all stakeholders in this kind of process have the opportunity to get their voices out there and have a meaningful conversation around what's required, instead of wondering about the big mystery. And then obviously at the end, a way to get back to a group and say approve with revisions, deny, some summary comments, and that's about it. So I think from a real quick overview, overview process is to go back to the table of contents and just think to share this with any authorizers, as far as, do they have a process in place, and would they like a model, and would they like a model based on some high quality national standards from the NACSA standards, as well as things that were adapted from the Wisconsin 118 statutes that meet state law, and a way to put this into play fairly straightforward, fairly easy, with some modifications that meet district needs. You've got those three sections that you can go over with them, from the background to the model application and that process, and then how to evaluate. So that's what this was all about.